But Albus, this is a matter of urgency. We can't have been the only ones to have seen it in the Quidditch crowd. We must inform the Ministry. Inform them in due time we shall, Professor McGonagall. But you must trust me. The students who know of the stone are well on their way to securing its safety. They have the support and wisdom of Rubius too. It was not only us who saw this ghost. Ghost. Albus, you can skip around it all you like, but there's no denying that that thing looked more like a... Yes, Minerva, I am aware, but panic we shall not. There is someone we need to locate this instant. I could not see them anywhere at the game. I have my suspicions. Keep pace now. Dumbledore and McGonagall paced through the school toward his office, feet clattering off the floorboards and cobbles, causing hollow echoes to sound throughout. They sped past the owlery, chronology, and incantations classrooms, dragon science classes, and transfiguration, all the while aiming for the back of Hogwarts School, where they would find the dark arts defense. Though just as they crossed the threshold of the fountain courtyard, out of the corner of his eye, Dumbledore clocked a hooded figure in the far distance, off down a corridor to their right. The corridor led in the direction of the dungeons. You there! Stop! Dumbledore boomed, sending his voice thundering through the lower floors of the school. The figure took another 3 paces before bringing both feet together, facing away from them. Everything was still and quiet, and Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall stood welded to the ground, stout and strong. A moment or two passed as the silence extended before them, and then the figure turned on their heel to face them. Eye contact was made. It was a dead heat. The air tense and stiff between the 3 of them. Dumbledore spoke soft yet firm, ensuring his voice reached the ears of that who stood before them. Excuse me, but might we have a word, Professor Quirrell? It was proving difficult to keep your footing, given the lack of light. Only a few enchanted candles, hovering weightlessly against the stone walls, gave you any vision. The other 4 were ahead of you, scouting the way. That was your only real comfort. Everything about the dungeon passageways felt eerie, cold, and uncomfortable. Though this was not the time to feel cowardly. A lot stood on your shoulders, and thankfully you were not alone. Hagrid, Hermione, Ron and Harry were there to help. But between you and the stone, or those who aimed to steal it, were a series of challenging obstacles, of which you were about to learn. Up ahead, as you reached a 90-degree bend leading down another steep flight of worn stone steps, Hagrid twisted at the waist and lifted a finger to his lips, urging you to stay quiet. Rounding the corner, you came upon a thick wooden door, which was latched shut with a heavy iron item. Hagrid slid it slowly across, with ease, given his size and strength, and peered through. After a moment, he turned, ushering us through. The coast was clear, you assumed. But stepping through the threshold of the doorway, it became instantly clear that the coast was not clear, not even remotely. The 4 of you students had your backs against the wall of an enormous room, which looked like an old dining hall. The walls were clad in ornate timber, with the remnants of banners and wall hangings littering the sills of windows which reached high. Where or what these windows looked upon, he didn't know, for they were black as night, with nothing to be seen above. These observations were all but a fleeting thought, as before you, slumped against the far side of the hall, blocking what must have been the exit, was a terrifying sight. You were looking straight into the eyes of a monstrous dog. A dog that filled the whole space between ceiling and floor. It had 3 heads, 3 pairs of rolling mad eyes, 3 noses twitching and quivering in their direction, 3 drooling mouths, saliva hanging in slippery ropes from yellowish fangs. It was standing quite still, all 6 eyes staring at you, and you all knew that the only reason you weren't already dead was that your sudden appearance had taken it by surprise. But it was quickly getting over that. There was no mistaking what those thunderous growls meant. Hagrid took a step forward, with a hand outstretched, seemingly in an attempt to soothe and calm the monster.
"What are you doing, Hagrid?"
Hermione shrieked, fearing the dog would pounce and devour you all at any second.
"Oh, don't you worry, Miss Granger. We won't come to no harm. This is my dog, Fluffy."
The 4 of you looked at each other in total bemusement, speechless, still riddled with fear at this apparent danger.
"Fluffy?"
Ron cried.
"What sort of name is that for this demonic creation? How on earth did you get a dog like this? And why?"
Followed Harry.
"Well, I bought him off some Greek chap in the pub one night last year. It was after Dumbledore had asked me to find something suitable to guard the dungeon and cellars. It must have been just after the stone arrived at the school."
It was only after he said this that your eyes were drawn to the outline of a trapdoor which lay nestled under the paws of this enormous 3-headed dog. That must have been the way out. But how on earth would anyone be able to get past this beast? You posted this question to Hagrid as he edged a little closer still to the simmering dog.
Come to think of it, a few months back I won that Norbert, who was an egg at that stage, in a card game at the Hog's Head. Did think it was a little strange that someone would just show up at the pub with a dragon egg. You know how long I've wanted to hatch my own. Anyways, we got a wee bit drunk, and I'm fairly sure I told them, through an honest slip of the tongue, how to get past Fluffy.
Did you see who they were? Please tell us they were a traveller or an honest stranger. Hermione couldn't help herself.
No, I never did see who they were. They were wearing a great big cloak with a huge hood. Couldn't even tell you much else about them.
Again, yourself, Harry, Ron and Hermione exchanged a knowing look. Quirrell. It must have been. It's the only way anyone could manage to get past this beast. Ron was the first to ask the next, most obvious question.
So, how do you get past this thing then?
Ron stuttered, without meaning to, as Fluffy let out an extra guttural growl, eyes still fixed on new students.
Why, you play him some music, that's all. Loves the stuff. Here, come on you lot. Don't be shy, he won't hurt you.
Well, how do we do that? You said, as you all remained rooted to the ground.
Over there, in the corner under that sheet. I kept an old harp in here, in case of needing to soothe him. I used to be a bit of a wizard on that old thing in my younger days.
You rolled your eyes and slowly sidestepped towards the corner where the covered structure was, not daring to move your eyes from the dog. Feeling for a corner, you grabbed it and pulled the sheet, sending clouds of old dust billowing into the air. Right enough. Beneath it lay an old harp, which, despite the cover, had not escaped the dust either. It was obviously untouched, for not a fingerprint lay on it. So how had Quirrell soothed Fluffy to sleep? Had he brought his own instrument? At this moment, Hermione drew her wand from her robe and whispered a quiet charm, fluttering it toward the musical instrument. In seconds, it burst into an enchanting tune, soft like a lullaby, which sung through the hall like a gentle breeze. You all looked at her quizzically, and she just shrugged her shoulders. You supposed you weren't surprised? Hermione seemed to know everything, but it certainly answered your question about Quirrell and how he got Fluffy to sleep. Fluffy had begun to settle a little with Hagrid's presence anyway, as he even dared a stroke of the centralmost head's nose. But still the dog growled, unfamiliar with the rest of you. Then the demeanour of the monster begun to transition from savage to docile pooch in aura of the music. It happened so quickly that in a matter of moments, the dog, or dogs, were all slumped, heads on the floor, snoring so loudly that it shook the floor. You gave it a minute, just wanting to make sure it was definitely, properly asleep, as the harp played continuously and ceaselessly. You were satisfied. Now was your chance. With the help of Hagrid, the four of you eased up towards the trapdoor and positioned yourselves around the obstructive paw and heaved, sliding it out of the way. It took some effort. The massive paw was very heavy, but the door was clear. Hagrid lifted the latch, propping it up on its own hinge, as you all stared upon a descending ladder, disappearing into yet more gloom. Age before beauty, smirked Ron, as he implied Hagrid lead the way. He grunted and eased his enormous frame down the tiny, rickety ladder. The rest of you followed, shutting the trapdoor behind you, as the soft tinkle of the harp fainted slowly and slowly away. It was all getting rather exhausting, and the heavy footsteps of the others told the same story. There was no time to waste in getting to the stone, but you were beginning to wonder how many obstacles still lay in your way, and how much time you actually had left. There was still no sign of the stone or any place which would seem to hide it. Hagrid, do you actually know what other things are guarding the stone? You asked.
Well, to be honest, I've never actually gone any further than that last room. I haven't ever had any reason to be down here beyond some routine maintenance. Great. So who knows what else is ahead then? We're going to be toast,
spluttered Ron in defeat.
Come on, Ron, we'll be fine,
said Harry.
Just keep our heads down. It can't be much further. These dungeons won't go on forever.
The passageways became darker still, if it was possible, and they began to feel less like the extensions of Hogwarts, and more like a derelict prison. Enormous cobwebs and pale creeping vines dangled in your way, and Hagrid swept them aside with a great hand, undeterred and unfazed. The ground was wet beneath your feet, with small water streams flowing down the edges of the stonework. You could feel the weight of the world above your head. It was clear you were very far underground now. You shut the image out of your head and focused.
Keep going, you lot,
encouraged Hagrid.
I think I can see light over there.
He was right. After only a few more minutes of trudging through dingy, airless tunnels, the space finally gave way to yet another massive room, and you all breathed a deep breath as if surfacing from underwater. This time, the room was more akin to an auditorium, with flat, carved stone seating arranged in a great circle around them. The walls curved into a domed roof, with smooth facets and featureless masonry. There was nothing ornate about this place. It was functional, cold, and a little unsettling. But it was also empty. Nothing was in there. It was simply a stone floor covered with a dusting of fine sandy gravel. There were no obvious doors, no hatches, no trapdoors this time. But above your head, central in the roof, you did see the smallest aperture, like a half-sized attic door, completely inaccessible. But that was it. Nothing else. Every little shuffle and footstep echoed endlessly. You stepped forwards from the others, toward the centre of the room, exploring your curiosity, scanning your surroundings. And it was then that you saw something strange a few paces ahead. Embossed in one of the many stone slabs were the very faint outlines of a grid. Or was it some form of frame? The oddest part was, interwoven in this etched grid were what looked like dozens of squiggly lines. But this was difficult to decipher as it was so worn. It looked like ancient hieroglyphics, though more of an art symbol than a language. Taking another step closer, you then felt a slight indentation beneath your feet, and then the entire stone slab shifted, causing you to start holding out your hands for balance. There was a loud thunk, then a slam, and then a few paces ahead of you, the entire ground began to part, splitting the whole room into two. You stumbled backwards towards the others, who themselves were forced to shuffle forwards as the floor retreated into the walls from beneath them. But thankfully, it stopped before too long. Then, after a painfully quiet pause, from within the dark cavern in the middle of the room began to rise an enormous wooden scaffold built with the oldest, heaviest looking wood you'd ever seen in your life. It crept upward, crunching and creaking under its own weight. It seemed to be made up of various floors, some bigger, some smaller platforms, and connected with either ladders or ropes. And then something else moved, which caught your eye. One of the beams appeared to shift, or did it slither? And once you saw one, you saw many. The whole structure was crawling with enormous great serpents gliding up and around particular areas of the thing. Your jaw dropped as everything fell into place in your mind. Right at the moment, the frame ground to a halt just shy of the roof. As if you needed any confirmation, from somewhere up above in the darkness, two small cubes fell and landed heavily on the ground in front of you. You peered at them, snake eyes staring back at you. Hagrid and the others still stood at the room's entrance, trying to make sense of it. You turned to them with a sigh of apprehension. I don't suppose any of you are any good at playing snakes and ladders? Hermione scoffed. What do you mean, any good? It's a game of luck. There's no skill involved. Is there any way we can ensure we win? I suppose we can't cheat the game. Otherwise it will probably just disappear into the ground or end somehow. All enchanted wizarding games are the same. Like chess, for instance. It just won't allow the players to use spells at all. It looks like we need to reach the roof. It's the only way onwards. You spoke with assurance. So, what will we do then? Harry probed, racking his own brain. Thinking carefully, you stooped down to pick up the two objects on the ground. Dice, carved from stone, painted with faint white markings depicting the numbers. The edges were smoothed with centuries of palming and rolling. You allowed them to fall between your fingers, sloping from face to face, number to number. The faces pointing upwards showed a 3 and a 4. 7 in total. Wasn't 7 supposed to be a lucky number? You were going to need a lot of it. That was certain. And then, with that thought, came a distinct moment of clarity, and you almost leapt with Eureka. Harry! Harry! Your pocket! Check your pocket! He at first looked confused, and then the cogs turned as he thrust his hand into his robe. His hand landed on an object, and he too grinned with joy as he withdrew the tiny vial of golden liquid, holding it out for everyone to see. Yes, the Felix Felicis luck potion, Ron cried. Hagrid was taken aback. Where on earth did you get that? We won it in Snape's class after making a perfect draft of the living death. You elaborated. You gave everyone a stern glance, then studied the game which towered above. It was a menacing sight, but one which you were prepared to tackle head-on, even with the risk. Luck was luck. It was not immortality or invincibility. You knew this, but you had to do this. You could feel it in the pit of your stomach. I'll do it, you said, holding out your hand. You've all looked out for me and guided me until now. I need to do this. Besides, I'm not too bad at board games. You swallowed hard, dice clutched tight in your left fist. You'd wish one of the others could roll the dice for you first, at least, relieving you of a little responsibility. But if this was worth doing at all, it was worth being thorough about it. For now, at least. You weren't sure how you'd fare when on the frame. Staring the giant game of snakes and ladders in the face, you thumbed the cork out of the potion bottle, tipped your head in slanchava to the others who were standing by watching, and emptied about 2/3 of the vessel into your mouth. In one big gulp, you swallowed it and waited. You didn't know what to expect. Was something supposed to happen? Ought you be feeling unstoppable? Were there any side effects? You wish you'd known this before consuming the miscellaneous liquid, but it was too late now. All that was left was the bitter-sweet aftertaste of an otherwise unremarkable beverage. It was difficult to liken it to anything in particular. There were herbal notes, kind of like sage and thyme, but it had the texture of silk and the colour of honey, but also the kick of a cask-strength whiskey. The group waited for your verdict, but you shrugged, implying nothing untoward. So, with a deep breath, nerves prickling your skin, you handed the remaining luck potion to Harry, who drank the last third. Best to spread the luck a little, you thought. It was time to roll the dice. You shook them and cast them into the sand. They took a moment to settle. One dice read 4, and the other read 1. A roll of 5. Approaching the frame, you hoisted yourself up the first ladder, hand over hand, and noted the marked squares on the wood beneath your feet. They were all numbered. Already your luck was with you, but it was perhaps a coincidence, as on spaces 4 and 6 were 2 frightening and enormous great pythons, clung and coiled around the beams above your head, sending sensing forked tongues out into the air. You had to trust the game. Slowly, carefully, You stepped deliberately from space to space, wincing and tensing as you passed beneath the first snake and stopped short of the second. They were looking at you hungrily, but it seemed they were playing the game too. Their eyes were beady, lifeless, but intelligent, their scaly skin marbled with blackened brown. Your forehead was beaded with perspiration from the nerves. Time to roll again. Roll. The dice, you'd left them on the ground.
Harry, you need to roll. My mind went blank and I didn't pick them up.
Harry obliged and grasped the pair from the ground. You looked ahead and up onto the next level. The odds were frighteningly poor. Whoever created this game had no intentions of someone passing by easily. The next 3 spaces were occupied with serpents. Then there was a single free one on space number 9. Then there were another 4 spaces, all guarded with slithering security, and then another single free one, before a similar pattern seemed to continue. You needed a 4 or a 9. Nothing else would do.
A 4 or a 9, Harry. That's it. Every other space is crawling, and I don't want to find out what happens if I get one.
Harry took a deep breath, shook the dice, and cast them onto the ground. They bounced, they spun, and they twirled and clattered together, slowly coming to an eventual standstill. One landed, showing 3. The other teetered on a corner, but it was falling towards 5. No good. Harry strained and held his breath, unable to speak, willing it to fall the other way. And that's when he felt it. He stared at the dice with unbreaking focus, connecting with it. And in an act of defying physics, he saw the dice tilt back on itself, spin, and land firmly in the ground. The number was 6. 9 in total.
Oh my goodness.
Everyone almost collapsed with relief, shock, and exasperation. How it was possible no one wanted to question. The fact is that the potion had worked for Harry. You felt the snakes slither and writhe in complaint as you hurried on past and made for the level above, keeping as far from the serpents as possible. No time to lose. You had to roll again. And so Harry did, and thankfully, keep as far away from them as possible is exactly what happened. You needed a 4 or a 7 in order to avoid the hissing and lurking beasts. And a 4 is what landed. You didn't hesitate to step from space to space, lurking beneath tasting tongues and dangling tails. On the next roll, however, all was not the same. As before, you had only 2 safe possibilities before heading up to the level above. But the potion had worked well until now. It needed to be a 3 or 11. That was it. Harry shuffled the dice in his palms and cast them out onto the dirt with intense focus again. Hermione, Ron and Hagrid watched onwards, feeling both helpless but hopeful. With a bounce and a clatter, they eventually found their place in the dust. The first die read 5. Not great. That left only one option left. The second, which landed a little further on, read 2. It was a total of 7. Seeing this, a cold and spiky sweat ran through your body, the colour draining from your face. How did this happen? He thought it was foolproof. The group stood down below, gazing up, fear in their eyes. Don't worry, you lot. It'll be okay. It'll be fine. You weren't sure how, but you had to say something. Swallowing hard again with your throat bone dry, you stepped forwards once, then a second time, sensing the rafters slither above your head in the darkness. Another few steps, 4, 5, and then you saw your destined space. Hesitant, you scanned above and to the sides, watching and expecting a sudden attack from a giant basilisk or viper. no signs yet. You closed your eyes and took the final 2 steps. Held your breath and waited for the inevitable. You heard it first from somewhere above your left shoulder. A slow, whispering glide as it dripped down the frame. It was getting nearer. You tensed, feeling it close to you. This was it. It was over. The snake coiled and struck out with a pressurized hiss. You yelped out loud. You couldn't help it. But wait. You were fine. It hadn't bitten. Or had it? Were you dead? You unclenched your eyes and slowly turned around, looking up into the gloom. You laughed out loud.
It's okay, everyone. I'm okay.
Down on the ground you heard 4 enormous exhalations of relief, and you could have sworn you saw Ron nearly faint. Above you, dangling helplessly and tied in a knot around a beam, was a great black basilisk, writhing and spitting, furious at the dilemma it was in. It must have got tangled. Or had you caused it? Perhaps. You had more luck on your side than you'd thought. Over the next short while, Harry rolled and rolled, helping you higher and higher up the floors and ladders, and you eventually reached the top level, mere meters from the hatch out of the room. With one final turn, the dice read 5, exactly what you needed. You took the last steps, placing your feet firmly in the final marked square. Almost immediately, you felt the ground shudder a little, which resonated up through the frame. Then followed the sound of 100 enchanted snakes evaporating into thin air with a huge flash of light and dust. You'd done it. The game was won.
That's it. Come on up. The path is clear.
You called down with relief. It was time to venture on, yet again, into the unknown. This was some strange, obscure labyrinth. It seemed to make little sense. But this was Hogwarts, and things were not always as they seemed. The tiny little attic hatch had swiftly given way to yet another dark hallway, but one paved with polished marble slabs and lit with dim, glowing chandeliers. This grandeur was setting up to something bigger. The end felt close. You could feel it in your stomach, the nerves creeping in. The corridor fell away down a flight of narrow steps, also flagged with marble, and through a carved stone archway. The five of you crossed the threshold as one. The arch expanded into a large space, like that of a cathedral. Enormous stone pillars supported a concave roof, and huge flaming torches burned fiercely around the perimeter. The heat was intense on your face. It felt sinister and evil in here. The steps continued downwards towards the epicenter, and it was at the bottom, stood with their backs to you, that you saw three individuals. Creeping step by step, the five of you drew out your wands in unison, preparing yourself for defense or even battle. Hagrid uttered a quiet few words of command.
Everyone follow my lead, and don't move your wands until I say so.
You nodded, body stiffly moving down the steps, getting closer and closer. The figures were dressed head to toe in black cloaks, hoods pulled up. They faced in the center, surrounded by a fire, a pedestal. But the pedestal was empty. They must have the stone already, you thought. Hagrid filled his lungs and finally confronted them.
Whoever you are, and whatever your intentions, it is over. Show yourselves and surrender.
He bellowed, the words ringing through the space for all to hear. The three did not move at first, or even flinch. but turned on the spot after a moment. You couldn't believe your eyes. None of you could. Your heart raced, your mind boggled. Your brain attempted to make sense of it all, but it struggled. The tallest of the three stood in the middle, was a man whose appearance was so dark and menacing it caused you to flinch. With dark, grey, slick hair and a contorted, thin smile, his pale and poisonous gaze tore through you. There was little life in his hollow eyes, as if he shared his existence with that of a ghost. Gellert Grindelwald. The rumours had been true. Grindelwald was a dark wizard who was considered to be amongst the most powerful and notorious wizards of all time. A student at Durmstrang Institute, Grindelwald was expelled for twisted and dark experiments and near-fatal attacks on students. In the years since, Grindelwald had become a complex figure, highly idealistic and talented, dedicated to achieving his ends at any cost. A revolutionary operating outside the law. He and his followers had committed countless crimes, including many murders. It was said he and Dumbledore shared a devastating and adverse past. The details of their history vastly unknown to others. But he was here in Hogwarts, and he had the stone to grant everlasting life. To Grindelwald's left was the ghostly shadow form of that Dementor, the thing Hermione had witnessed during the Quidditch game. Dementors were among the foulest creatures to walk the earth. They infested the darkest, filthiest places. They gloried in decay and despair. They drained peace, hope, and happiness out of the air around them. If one got too near to a Dementor, every good feeling and every happy memory would be sucked out of you. If it could, and chose to, the Dementor would feed on you long enough to reduce you to something akin to itself, soulless and evil. You would be left with nothing but the worst experiences of your life, and would just be an empty shell that lost its soul. But perhaps the most shocking thing of all was who stood to Grindelwald's right-hand side. Short in stature, and somehow looking menacing herself beneath her black cloak against all other familiar visual cues, was your herbology teacher, Pomona Sprout. Hagrid shifted uncomfortably and could hardly hold back his despair.
Miss Sprout, Pomona, how could you? After all the years we've known each other. That's enough, Rubius,
she snapped, but you could see her own emotions were being withheld, but barely.
The wizarding world has changed. We need to change with it. Hogwarts will be no more. A new power is rising, and we must be a part of it, don't you see?
Miss Sprout said this whilst looking up toward Grindelwald, who stood like a grotesque statue of power.
I'm sorry, Hagrid,
she said finally.
Don't apologize, Pomona,
Grindelwald finally hissed.
You are wise and loyal, and have chosen the path to a better future.
The five of you shivered, feeling uneasier by the second. Grindelwald addressed you all.
Tell me where the stone is, and no one will be hurt.
Ron looked at you oddly, sharing your own thoughts. They didn't have the stone. They must be playing tricks. No one said a word.
I will ask only once. Do not waste my time, or I will be forced to do things I do not wish to do. Just tell me where the stone is, and no one will be hurt.
Again, you all said nothing, but looked at each other with wide eyes. What should you do now? Hagrid whispered quietly to you all.
Once ready, on my signal, I'll take Grindelwald.
Your hand brushed past your robe and hit something solid in your pocket. What was that? You grasped the thing from the outside and squeezed it. Another prickle scuttled across your neck. How could it be? Grindelwald was getting impatient and finally roared out.
must give me the stone. No, stupefy,
Hagrid shouted as he twirled his great wand and cast his spell toward the trio. The rest of you followed immediately with enormous flurries of power, sending waves of sparking, electrifying energy and voltage at the villains. But in a wave of fury, Grindelwald retaliated and swirled a force field of defense around his accomplices. They stopped the spells dead against it in a sparking firework display. You tried again, this time putting every ounce of energy you had into your spell. Again, the force field went up, your 5 wands sending arcing bolts of electrifying magic at their defense bubble. Grindelwald had had enough. He signalled something to Miss Sprout, who twirled her own wand, and in a flash of light and smoke appeared to teleport themselves elsewhere out of the hall. They had vanished into thin air. All fell quiet as you tried to regain your breath, panting heavily. Ron slumped on the stairs, and Hagrid offered a hand to Hermione's shoulder.
Are you okay?
Harry asked you. You nodded. It had all happened so quickly. Remembering, you plunged your hand into your robe pocket and pulled out the object for everyone to see. The Philosopher's Stone sat in your palm. Everyone looked on in shock.
But how? How on earth did that get there?
Ron speculated.
I have no idea. One minute it was empty, and then it was there. Never mind that just now,
Hagrid said.
They'll be back. Come on. We need to leave. Now.
Dumbledore's office was crowded. Ron, Harry, Hermione and Hagrid were lined up against a bookshelf on the left, with you stood before him in front of his desk. The grandfather clock ticked softly in the background. Dozens of candles crackled and flickered in the dimly lit space. and Dumbledore's phoenix sat perched on his desk, fiery scarlet feathers shimmering in the gloom. Shining from above, through the stained glass window of his office, the setting sun cast soothing rays through the dusty air. Albus Dumbledore sat at his desk, hands clasped, and stood to either side of him were Professor McGonagall and Professor Quirrell. You looked at him, trying not to seem too suspicious, and he returned your gaze with a gentle smile.
Thanks to the efforts of you and your 4 associates, Hogwarts is temporarily safe. Thank you. Thank you all.
The 5 of you looked at each other and around the room with coy smiles, though somewhat warily. There was still something which needed answered.
But, Dumbledore, how did the stone end up in my pocket? And what will happen to it now? Ah, yes, the stone. It has a conscience of its own, and can often choose who it ends up with. It evaded the presence of those who sought it, and returned to a place of safety, albeit temporarily. It saw no greed in you. We suspected Grindelwald was seeking the stone. But don't worry, it's very safe now. Very safe indeed,
Dumbledore said, winking at Professor Quirrell, who smiled back in his usual nervous way.
Though, it must be said, we would be much less the wiser if it hadn't been for our good friend Quirinus here. He had been following Miss Sprout for a number of days, you know, and has been crucial in the stone's relocation and safekeeping. Professor Quirrell here wasn't far behind you. He was trying to protect the stone after having suspected Sprout be after it.
Dumbledore patted Quirrell on the shoulder, who smiled and shifted nervously again. Something seemed odd. Professor McGonagall looked at you down her nose and through thin spectacles in turn, smiling her gratitude in a straight-lipped kind of way, saying nothing.
That'll be all now, everyone. You may continue on with your wizarding lives.
Dumbledore said finally, and winked kindly at you, offering a hand towards the door. You bowed a little bow of appreciation and thanks. And one by one, Hagrid, Ron, Hermione, Harry, and yourself ushered towards the office doorway. You were last out, and something was troubling your mind. Just before closing the door behind you, you took one last glance back over your shoulder to see Quirrell staring straight at you. His eyes glinted. His smile was not the usual nervous one, but there was a hint more twist at the edges, and he did not blink. You met his stare, thoughts tumbling around in your head as you pulled the door shut.